Arsenal beat Manchester United, which means they're the better team, doesn't it? Or does it? Because we're going to find out what we actually learned in this game. From me, JJ Bull, but mostly from
me, Jon Mackenzie.
Correct, because John's been watching all the pressing. He likes pressing. What we found from this game is that we knew how Manchester United were going to play. We know they want to play in transition on the break. That's what they do, right? So that's what we saw. And we know that what they want to try and do is get the ball to Rashford or Martial or Anthony in space that they can create, and they can do it in a number of different ways. That's what we thought was going to happen. Is that what we saw?
Yeah, I think so. And I think Mikel Arteta will have come into this game knowing that that's how Manchester United were going to play, because that's how they tend to play against the big teams. I think he was just, because of that, a little bit worried about allowing space for Manchester United to attack. So
trying to find ways to prevent this ball getting in behind, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the ways that you can do that is by actually not being quite so aggressive in your press.
So when you say a less aggressive press, does that mean in terms of like where they engage, or do they sit off them on purpose, or what is the plan? What are they doing?
Well, I think usually when an elite team is playing against an opposition, they don't want to allow them to have the ball too long, because the longer you give them possession without putting them under pressure, the more they're dictating the game, right? So usually what you'd see from Arsenal is that they would try and go as quickly as possible to a sort of a fairly man-to-man press. They'd force the ball one side, and everyone would jump to players on that side of the pitch and try and win the ball back quite quickly.
Or force it long.
Yeah. But that's not what we saw happening in this game. What we actually saw was that Arsenal were quite happy to allow Manchester United to have the ball around the back, and as a result, Manchester United actually had more possession in the first half because Arsenal were happy to allow that.
Well, that's it. The stats show from the game that in the first half, United had far more passes than Arsenal, more possession, about 55% possession, something like that. Now, we disagree about this, but one of the reasons I think like both managers are reacting to this, so what I noticed them do, not from goal kicks, but at certain phases of possession, if maybe Lindelof and Martinez were this high in the pitch, just pushing them back a little bit, right? What I saw them doing was pulling Casemiro between them, these two, so then these guys can push out wide, which means they sort of vacate the middle of the pitch. So the middle of the pitch is mostly open, so then Casemiro can help deal with this, and they've got routes to get through this way, which I think disrupts the Arsenal pressing structure, which is why, because if they've got Nketiah is trying to show the ball mostly to this side, right, trying to get the ball here, and Nana can come out and be an actual ball player as well. What that then means is that if you've got Casemiro being watched by someone like Havertz or Odegaard, or whoever's dropping in the system, they can't really go that far because it disrupts the rest of the structure, which means that Arsenal just sit back a little bit to let them have the ball, because then once we saw with United, they couldn't really get it forward, which is why they had most of the possession, but it's all here. So therefore, like, if that is wrong, because you said it was more to do with Arsenal's pressing.
Yeah, well, I think that the reason why Manchester United do things like this, so you talked about Casemiro dropping out. Again, that's because he's, what most elite teams are doing is they're going to try and orientate themselves player for player, right? So if Casemiro, like as you said, if Casemiro is Odegaard's responsibility, Casemiro drops out, Odegaard follows him, you've opened up the space. That's what Manchester United are trying to do, and they do all of these positional rotations, right? We see inverted fullbacks from Erik Ten Hag teams. We see the centre backs even stepping up, which is quite unusual, into space as well. And the idea there again is to if the striker is responsible for marking the centre back, does the striker go or does he stay? And again, you're trying to create these. Did they move
them inside a lot? Lindelof, Martinez inside in this game.
They did do it a bit. Yeah. That was certainly happening. And the whole idea then is that you know that Arsenal are going to be player for player, so you're creating space. And then if you can get the ball into this space, you can build up well and get the ball into these sorts of areas onto the possession of someone like Fernandes. He can then play these balls in behind the high line. And the other thing is as well is that if you can pull, if the opposition are player for player, you can often get them having to pull their back line really high as well, because you need to make sure you're not allowing any space as well. So that's what Manchester United were all about. Arsenal were simply not allowing themselves to be pulled apart like this. So rather than going player for player, what we actually saw was them going quite zonal, I thought. So another thing to say as well is Onana, just a fantastic player in build-up, right? So effectively you're in a situation where if you go player for player, you've got 10 outfield players against 11 of Manchester United's players as well, because Onana is so good at that. So I think Mikel Arteta recognises that if he tries to match Manchester United player for player, what's going to happen is they're going to play into Manchester United's hands. They're going to end up being pulled up the pitch. Space is going to be opened up. Fernandes is going to get the ball in these situations, and before you know it, Rashford is going to get the ball. So
that makes sense, right? Because then what's the thing in my theory with Casemiro dropping in here, whether we did it through design or through just spotting that it was an opportunity to do it, because you basically play these guys here. Something you can move these guys slightly further wider, which means you can push these guys higher up, which means that your wide forwards can play slightly more inside, so that you can get them into that dangerous channel. But that's the ball. They weren't getting that ball in behind. But despite with all this that's going on, right, with United being allowed the ball here, wherever they're setting up and doing all these sorts of things, and Arsenal's press not as aggressive as normal. It's certainly not after the first goal, because the first goal comes from United taking advantage of, it's a loose ball inside the pitch, I think, and Eriksen wins it, I think, is that right? Is it Havertz plays it loose, Eriksen gets it, and then exactly the same thing you've seen before. Rashford eventually ends up in this situation with the ball and hits it past the goalkeeper. And then they change their pressing structure after that. But you can see that the difference in the pressing structure in the goal before and after almost, right?
Yeah, I think what we see from Arsenal for most of the game then is rather than them committing play for play, they actually care much more about covering this area. So Nketiah is sort of sitting on the pivot player. He may step up to the goalkeeper, but often won't, because again, as we've said, as soon as you get drawn into those situations, you know that you're going to get played around. Mm-hmm. And then what we had is Havertz and Ødegaard in the middle and Rice behind them. The two Manchester United. So Rice is moving between Fernandes and Eriksen, depending on which side the ball is on. If he goes one way, then the winger is supposed to come in and cover the other player, and vice versa. Saka comes in here. So if the ball comes onto this side, Ødegaard is going to step out, Nketiah is going to sit in this sort of area, and Havertz is going to cover the pivot player. So again, they're constantly thinking, how do we make sure there's no space in the middle? The ball's on the other side, rather than Nketiah coming across and Ødegaard sitting here as well. Actually, what we see is Nketiah staying here to make sure that Onana can't get the ball forward too much. Havertz pushes onto the ball carrier, Ødegaard moves inside, and because obviously Rice is moving on this side, Saka comes in again. So what we're seeing is constantly thinking zonally first and foremost, right? We want to make sure the zone is filled, and then once those zones are sorted, then you go player for player. So it's much less aggressive, it's much less player-oriented from the start, and the idea behind it is that you don't allow Manchester United to generate that space that they're really dangerous from attacking from.
So why then is Rice running up here in the build-up to the first goal?
Yeah, and this is the big question, because this is basically the only time you see Arsenal really committing to a high press. Like, right. Declan Rice is the defensive midfielder. He shouldn't necessarily be as high up the field. Now, in this situation, what's happened is they've forced Manchester United into the corner, and I think they feel actually we've got a good chance of winning the ball back here, and they actually do that. The ball ends up coming out to Kai Havertz.
I just noticed Lindelof is playing in that, like the half space almost.
He's pushed right forward, because they're trying to pull it around. But the problem is that even though their press works here, when they lose the ball, they make a mistake, they're then completely open, so that 10 seconds later, we see this scenario, which is, this is the Arsenal back line, Manchester United's front three, Eriksen's in behind the midfield line, and he just has a really easy pass between the two players to Rashford, who, as we know, is just super dangerous in those areas. So that was the only time they really committed to going aggressive in the press. Manchester United punished them, and that's just the fine margins at the highest level. You get munched in transition if you make one mistake in that kind of situation. So yeah, that was, I guess Arteta will look back at that and be annoyed, because he'll say, we set up in such a way to prevent these sorts of things happening, and it happened.
So this is the thing, right? So that he stops Man United from being able to be dangerous in transition, except for one time when they are, they score, right? But then another thing you see with Arsenal, and there's a thing. So Man United go 1-0 up, of course, and Arsenal's press maybe isn't quite as aggressive, or isn't quite as high for a little bit of time, or most of the game after that. They definitely drop a little bit deeper, to me anyway. Don't leave so much space in behind. Maybe I can't see the last line because of the TV angle, right? But that's part of the problem. But one of the things for me that I noticed with Arsenal is that after that goal, one of the only attacks in the entire first half where they play one-touch football is how they score. Because what they keep doing is getting into these situations where, obviously Martinelli's a very dangerous player, but he does the exciting stuff, gets these positions, and then what happens is they've got Man United get back into their shape, or whoever they're playing against gets back into their shape. Let's drop them in, a little bit like this. And they're just denying them opportunities to get these dangerous cutbacks because they've got all the space here. Because they get to these areas in the final third, and then it slows down. And then you start seeing, you'll notice this more and more, is like 2, 3, 4, 5 touches. Takes a touch, controls it, slows it down, looks for a teammate, takes it, looks up, slows it down, switches, maybe Saka's over here, something like that, maybe get an overlap, goes over here, goes back. Basically what I'm trying to say is they get to the final third after maybe slightly quick build-up, and then it slows right down to 3, 4, 5 touches. But the goal is a really quick one touch, like all things happen really quickly. I remember the game against Nottingham Forest at the start of the season at the Emirates. Same thing, they build up really slowly, can't break them down because they're in a block. So obviously they're locked down positions, it's hard to break down. And the only way they score the first goal is because Martinelli does like a 360 spin, which disrupts the lines, and that's how you get the goal from it. So it's like, I can't work out why Arsenal look a bit worse this season, why they're slowing it down so much. Is it just he's trying to control counterattacks or create this pause effect?
I think that Arsenal have personnel who are going to look best when they're attacking really dynamically, getting forward quickly. And I think oppositions have worked that out. And so what we're seeing from oppositions is just them being really happy to, manage the build-up, force them into wide areas so it gives them time to...
So it's more the opposition doing it rather than Arteta having
I think so, yeah, because when you, as you say, once they get into these sorts of areas, you're relying on either individual moments to break through the lines, or you're trying to, find Eddie Nketiah or Gabriel Jesus from crosses swung in, which is obviously not the best use of those players. And it's something I've noticed, I think, this whole season, is that they're not able to actually generate chances through the middle of the field because teams are happy to block them out. This zone is called zone 14 by coaches, I guess. This is a really dangerous... If you can get your foot on the ball inside opposition blocks and generate chances from here, you're much more likely to generate dangerous chances from these sorts of situations. And so what we're seeing from oppositions, I think, is knowing that Arsenal aren't that great at building through the middle, forcing them wide, sitting in their block, and then making it much harder for Arsenal to
if they play more of these first time 1-2 touch, 1-2 football moves that they can make, where they go from back to front really quickly, then the opposition doesn't have time to get back into their shape to be able to do it. Like, they break lines by doing it. And it's really nice when they play that way. And I think they did it more last season. So I just, I know you think you say it's more to do with the opposition. I wonder if it is just a little bit of tempo and not quite up to speed with...
Well, I think it is to do with them as well, but I think they make it easy for the opposition to defend them in the way that they do. Now, what we've seen in the past from Arsenal is they play with a flat four like this. They have a pivot player, and then one of the players inverts, right? So Zinchenko comes inside. The whole idea behind this is that the opposition are trying to block you out, and what you want to do is get your pivot players inside the block, causing problems for the opposition. Because what you should be able to do, if you have the correct personnel, is you should be able to pull the block around, get the ball inside, and then suddenly, you'll now be able to generate these chances in the central areas much better, without having to, what Arsenal are doing, which is slowly build up, force the opposition into a block. Actually, if you're in the situation where the opposition are going to commit forward to you, play these balls through, and then you end up with these situations where you're now generating central dangerous chances. That's what we're not seeing from Arsenal at the moment, because actually I think that largely it's to do with the fact that Declan Rice doesn't seem to at the moment like playing in the block, receiving the ball back to goal and turning. So what we're seeing is actually Rice dropping out a lot outside of the block, and all this does is that it means that the opposition can sit in their block, and the ball just ends up moving around in these sorts of areas. So they're not really incisive through the middle, and it's causing them problems.
That's really interesting as well, because if you look at data, you can see where the passes go in the game, and this Opta analyst graphic, thank you, Opta, you can see it shows you the ball's having to go wide. It's not the same as the donut we talked about a few years ago. It's not that, to be clear, it's not that. But they are having to push the ball wider, and it's interesting because that is the first half, and in the second half you can see exactly. The direction of travel is all wide, right? What we're seeing here is the opposition sitting in this block. So even the passes that are coming from the central areas here, these aren't dangerous passes where the opposition are higher up the pitch and you're penetrating this long
them.
one's when you come on the pitch, was it?
Yeah, that's right. This area is just being blocked out by the opposition. Arsenal being forced wide, and they're just much less dangerous when they're not dynamic and when they're playing against a block in wide areas because of the personnel that they have.
So they look a little bit less maybe threatening as they go on, but then you think about what happened in the game, right? So United had that one transition chance that they scored from. Later on, they had the offside for Garnacho, which it's very, very tight. And but largely, I would say Arsenal kind of sat off Man United as much as they could to allow them to push up, so they'd have space to attack, but then weren't quick enough in possession. I think they're taking too many touches when they get to the final third to do that. But there's one more thing that Jon Mackenzie has spotted in this game that has turned the entire game and narrative, because as we said, I bet everyone's going, Arsenal's the best, Man United is the worst. It's not like that. What have you noticed, John?
Yeah, it's corners, because Declan Rice obviously scores a corner from a corner in added time. And it was something that I was kind of interested in, because I'd noticed that Manchester United were quite happy to just allow Declan Rice space at the back of the back post, basically, when they're taking corners. So I've got a few corners screenshots here. So corner's been taken from this side. Declan Rice is off the back. And you can see no one is really marking, and they're happy to leave him free. We've got a few of these. This is another corner. This is in the 14th minute.
It's a lot of front post zonal marking here from Man United.
Yeah, they are overloading the front areas. I guess because of the flick on. And the idea is that if Rice does get through, then you've got Dalot here. So I think in this corner, we can see it here. Ball comes in. Here's Onana. And Rice is up against Dalot.
Right.
So the idea then is that Dalot should be able to attack the ball and clear it away. But it carries on happening. This is the back post from the
right side.
Opposite side. Yeah. This is Declan Rice highlighted here. He ends up getting a free header here because he's allowed to get a run on the defenders. This is happening, and it just happens. And Rice free. Again, Rice.
Is this because United are front-loading zonal marking near post, and then that means they've left spare men, or is it?
I'm not entirely sure why it is that they're happy to leave Rice free, and it's clearly a decision that they're making. And I suppose the idea is that you rely on your zonal markers to be able to clear that. Maybe they think that Declan Rice isn't very dangerous aerially, which he had a free header which he missed.
Yeah.
So maybe this is just a tactical decision on their part. Okay. But what I noticed is actually in the second half, Arsenal come out, and what we start seeing is two Arsenal players blocking the Manchester United players around Declan Rice, forcing them out and trying to create space around Rice. So this is the first corner after the second half.
Yeah.
And now we've got Gabriel on Martinez, Martial and Havertz, and what they're going to do is they're going to push and try and create space. And we start seeing this in all of the corners from here on in. So again, here's Declan Rice, free at the back post. Now we've got blockers on these two players. They're going to force them, generate space around him.
Very cool, John.
This is the last corner. This is the one that he scores from. And again, you can see Tomiyasu and you can see Gabriel. They're both going to push, and the ball's going to come to the back post. It comes to Rice. He has the space then to take it down. It doesn't take a particularly good touch, but because those blockers have forced space, he's then able to get the shot away as well. So I wonder whether or not the Arsenal analysts have looked at the way that the corners are going in the first half and noticed that Manchester United are happy leaving him free. And so what they've done is they've said, let's just get blockers in front of him for every corner in the second half.
Because Dalot's still back post zone, right? So it's exactly the same setup. They haven't changed. Yeah, it's really interesting. So that's how they score the goal. So there we go. So a corner has swung the game, and obviously Arsenal they can just sit back and pounce on the counter as Man United push on. That's how the game went. So what did we learn from the game, John? We learned that you should block people and let Declan Rice win a header for corner. We've learned that Onana's really good at kicking the ball, so you can't really press them as well as you want to. So maybe the best idea is to sit off them and let them have the ball and build up and block it deeper. What else we learn?
Yeah, let Manchester United have the ball at the back, because they're not going to be that dangerous if you allow them to do that.
Except for when they are.
Yeah, which is when you press too high. So don't press too high against Manchester United and you'll be able to manage them. And then I guess the other thing is Arsenal still seem to have this problem in build-up where they can't be too penetrative through the middle. And I think that's something they're going to have to work on through the
And then they take too many touches in the final thirds in their approach phase. So there we go. That's what we've learned about Arsenal versus Man United. Who's the better team? Decided by us and you. Leave in the comments. Drive the engagement for the video. Help the algorithm. Have a lovely week.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.